Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers CBO.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's knowledge forum. We got a special treat for y'all, Jorge Garibay, and he will be sharing some information on bee pollination. And just for those of you who's first time joining us, this is Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers community-based organization. We are a non-membership nonprofit. Really, our mission is to meet agricultural producers where you are and support you to the best of our ability in becoming the best you can be and for your community. So we have these knowledge forums here just as a platform to introduce valuable insights on various topics. So we have a special one here today. Before we jump in, we do want to share a couple housekeeping items. We do try to keep these forums no more than 90 minutes. We know that it's midweek. Want to get you back to your families there. So the other thing is that each one of you, other than the panelists, are currently muted. And what we'll do, you're muted and your cameras are off. But what we will do is have we'll open everything up to the audience if they have a Q&A towards the end here. So, and the other thing to know is that we are recording. We do have a couple panelists. We have one that's been delayed a little bit, but we, myself, P. Wade Ross here, we've got also Uche Agba and Arlena Brumfield will be joining us here shortly. So while we wait for Arlena, Uche, I'm going to ask you to start things off with a little icebreaker, if you can.
Thanks, Phil. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Knowledge Forum. We're very excited to have you. So, yeah, we always have these icebreakers at the start of our Knowledge Forum because we think it's important that we all get to know each other. And this is one of those moments. So, if you are on your computer or wherever you are on the chat box, it should be open. Share with us. Where are you messaging us from? Where are you coming from, hitting us up from? I see some people already. Hi, this is Teresa. Hello, Joshua, Texas. Nice sunny here today. Heavy rain coming tomorrow night again. Yes, we love the rain here at the Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers. It is amazing. The rain is necessary for crop growth, especially now in the springtime. We have Angela. She says San Antonio. Hello, Angela. I mean San Antonio too. Veronica. She says Lancaster, Texas. Welcome, Veronica. We have Brian from Early, Texas. Welcome, Brian. We have Tina from Brennan, Texas. All right, home of the Bluebell ice cream. I love me a Bluebell. I got a couple of pints in my freezer right now. Hey, Marcus from Dallas, Texas. Welcome, Marcus. And we have Raquel from Troop, Texas. I've never been to Troop, but I'd love to come by. I'll love to stop by. We got Alan Smith from Philadelphia. Welcome, Alan. Okay. And we got Georgia from Alto, Texas. Wow, we got a lot of people today in attendance. Feel free to keep chatting on the chat box. It's an opportunity to network and learn. And we're very excited for the day, especially because there are more things we want to do an icebreaker on. So, the next thing we always ask is like, are you a farmer? Who's a farmer here? Do you own a farm, a small garden, a micro garden? Doesn't matter. Do you grow plants? I have plants. See, I have my little plants here. So I'm a grower, So if you're a grower, say yes in the chat. Just say yes, no, thinking about it, maybe. And as well as maybe you can also share with us, what you are growing. What do you plan to grow? If you plan to grow anything. So feel free to jump on the chat and share with us. Veronica says, yes, she is a grower, farmer, planter. Tina says, yes, she is as well. Teresa, she got 2.5 acres growing vegetables, gardens, and native plant gardens. Wow, congratulations. I'd love to have 2.5 acres. Deidre says actively growing. Yes, Deidre. Georgia says, I grow gardens to contribute to our local food bank. Thank you so much. I love volunteering at a local food bank, and it's amazing to see how your produce can actually serve others. Thank you. Angela, first year, I will actually start selling produce. Woohoo! That's right. Straight to the bank, Angela. We got Tina. She said, flowers for my bees. Okay, Tina, you're in the right place. I see you. I see you. I see what you're trying to do there. Okay, so we got some good people in here. So that's very exciting. I'm glad to hear that. And I know today we're going to be talking about how bees contribute to the growth of your plant and your agriculture ways. I am particularly afraid of bees, me personally. I don't know about you, Phil, but I fear bees. But, you know, since we talked about bringing up our amazing guests, I've just been like exploring, like trying to decipher, okay, how does bees work? How do you not get stung by a bee? Do I have to wear gloves every time I'm around them? Do I need them around me? Like, I don't want them to fly around the house because I'll just be like, I don't know if I can sleep. What do you think, Phil?
I'm kind of more of I've been a more of a livestock guy. I'm getting into the soil, but my brother is a gardener. So he's been preaching bees, bees, bees for the longest. So I'm kind of where you're at there. I'm learning, but I had the opportunity to go to a conference up in Kansas, and that's where I met our guest, so Jorge. And man, his story is so amazing that we had to bring him on our show here to share with everyone else. So I know Jorge is trying to tee up a few. Oh, looks like he's got it now. Jorge, before you hit that button to play your video,
Yep.
I'd love for you to kind of just share your journey into small space gardening and farming, because it sounds like we have a lot of folks on here who that would really inspire. So if you could do that, and then the show is yours.
Okay. Well, I wanna say, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to say that I know that you said that you're more of a livestock guy, but I want to expand the the definition of livestock. You know, when I've given presentations like this before, I've given presentations to where I tell people, you know, you have livestock that walk on hooves, ones that walk on feet, ones that, you know, crawl under creepy crawlers under the ground, and we really see our bees as an integral part of that livestock, that last regenerative principle, pillar, if you would, for regenerative farming of all sizes. So my journey, a lot of it is in the presentation, but my background is in queen rearing and commercial pollination. Started in California 20 years ago. I ended up here in the Midwest just because of well, if you want to be successful somewhere, you need to go find where success already is. So we'll talk about that as it pertains to your backyards, to your small acreage, to your large acreage. You know, sometimes we need to look at it with a different lens. You know, what is successful? Can we use that? And can we exploit it in a good way? You know, can we manage it to our advantage if it's already there? So that's really kind of what we're going to talk about today. There's so much information, and just a little background. You know, I currently reside on 1/8 of an acre in a city, Hutchinson, Kansas. It's a pretty big city. I literally am 3 blocks away from City Hall. On my acreage, I raise everything from mealworms to Coturnix quail, bobwhite quail, hundreds of rabbits. I do have 10 pigs right now, piglets and small pigs, and they're being used for rototilling, my overwintering pens. I raise a lot of chickens to overwinter to sell in the spring as laying hens. I do have some chickens for myself, but I do have a lot of quail. I raise meat pigeons, and then I do all of that supports shrubs, trees, bushes that support my bees. So everything that I do has to work within itself, and we'll talk about how to be successful with that. I guess the biggest key thing is don't be afraid to try anything, but really focus on what you love eating first. If you love eating it, if you love using it, you know, if you love, if you are, you know, if you're really comfortable with selling it because you yourself use it as part of your life, then all of this is easy. All the struggles will be much easier. I've tried, you know, to raise pheasants, to raise turkeys, to raise other things, and I just don't really like those animals. So it's really tough to sell things. Just because something's hot or a fad, you know, doesn't mean, you know, that it'll be a lot tougher for you, let's say that. So I've got a short video that talks about pollinators and, you know, how they kind of work in the agricultural landscape, and then we'll start in the presentation. So I'm going to share the video here. Let's see where we at. Goes away. That goes away. Here's that video. Pause. And come on. Can you see the video? No,
No.
not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Where are
That's all right.
you?
Well, while you're queuing that up, I want to mention that Angela, she says I have a lot of companion planting and flowers in my raised beds. Okay. And even Teresa mentioned bees around here, and I have an agreement. I don't bother them and grow lots of flowers for them. They leave me alone. I love them. Okay. You know what? I want to have that kind of faith that Teresa has in her bees, like that, you know, and I'm sure Jorge has the same amount of faith. I'm growing. I'm going to get there. I promise. I'm going to get there. This discussion is definitely going to get me there. Brian says, we have bees, grapevines, and just planted wild plums, working on adding more pollinator habitats.
Perfect.
Wow.
Okay. You guys see the
Yes,
video?
we do.
Okay, here we go. Take it away.
Bees are so fascinating. When you first go into a beehive, you're like worried about getting stung. And then as soon as you start watching them and seeing them on the comms, communicating with each other, it's just so fascinating, so complex. And it mostly works until we get in the way of it.
Populations of honeybees are dying at levels that are unprecedented and very concerning. Close to half of the colonies in the U.S. dying every single year.
Many pollinators have disappeared. Farming has become a lot bigger, and so due to all this, you know, now we need beekeepers that can move bees from one place to the other.
Learn a good deal from bees about the health of the landscapes that we inhabit, and we can learn a good deal about the folly of setting up our agriculture in quite the way that we have.
Agriculture is an interruption of a natural system, but it can be done thoughtfully as an interruption of a natural system with great benefits.
It's going to take 20, 30 years for that ground to get back to the shape it was to sustain life for all these wild insects, birds, fowl, and everything else.
Protecting the land around us, protecting the soil under us is really our obligation. And from that, we get delicious, nourishing products.
We've been pollinating fruits and vegetables and nuts since the 70s, 60s, 50s. And we haven't had these kind of losses. We're not being beekeepers, we're just trying to hang on to our business.
So that, let's see, stop share of that, and I'll put the presentation up. There is so much to unpack there. I mean, there's just so much. Let's see, share my screen. Can you see my screen here?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so not that one. Where are we?
How goes it, Arlena?
Okay, can you see my screen? What can you see?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we can see your laptop where it says land is not merely
Okay, perfect.
spoiled.
So we're there. Okay, we're kind of doing this a little different way. Well, I want to say hello, this is me, and we're going to be working off this laptop right here. Okay, so it's interesting with the principles of regenerative farming, which I was introduced to 4 years ago. It seems like it's a new thing or a 10, 20, 30-year thing, but this quote right here, land is not merely soil. It is a foundation of energy flowing through a circuit of soils, plants, and animals. I mean, Aldo Leopold, right? So we're looking at somebody who hundreds of years ago, a couple hundred years ago, already kind of knew this, right? But this energy is what we're going to talk about a little bit. And then the circuit of soils, plants, and animals. So we need all three. So many of I think the follies, like the video said, of how we've set things up is we haven't integrated all three. You know, we either focus on the soil or we focus on the plants or on the animals, but rarely do we take everything full term. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about with bees. I run a bee company called Napa Bees. That stands for North American Pollinator Alliance. And, you know, you can look up, you know, there's been articles written about me. We use completely different types of hives that are designed by me, that have evolved over the past 20 years. The traditional hive design you saw in the videos, that's a design that's 150 years old. And at that time, they were using wood that was, you know, much closer grained, just a different type of material than what hives are being used in now. And I think that's one of the challenges of what beekeepers are having. So our hives are kind of different. We do all sorts of talks, field studies. We have field days at our different farmers' places. Just so you know that, you know, we're pretty involved in the education aspect of this. Where it all began with bees for me, you can kind of see in this picture, I hope, that this is a wild colony comb hanging off of a tree. When I was 5 years old, I remember this just because it was such an important part. Now, I didn't know I was going to be a beekeeper when I was 5 years old, but my father, my uncles, and I were riding horses out on a mountain, and we came across a hive just like this. The hive was a lot more active. You can see there are bees here inside the hive. And this is what a hive would naturally do if it could overwinter and protect itself, you know, without human assistance. So my uncles, I mean, I didn't know what was going on, but my uncles ended up making a little smoking fire with some shrub on a stick. They held that up to the bottom of the hive and smoked the bees away from the area where the comb honey was. They were able to cut some comb honey for us to eat, and we ate it. So from a very early age, from that age, you know, I was under the guidance of people who were truly, what do you want to call it? Stewards of the land. They could have easily trashed that whole hive, cut it all down, killed all the bees, and taken all of the honey, but they didn't. They moved the bees away enough for us to enjoy whatever honey we could enjoy, left the rest, and left the hive intact so that it would continue to live on its own. And that's really kind of the basis of what we do is, and we'll talk a lot about that at the end, but I hope that kind of makes sense, is like stewardship comes from your mentors, comes from your parents, from your, you know, and your uncles and things like that. And if you don't have that, you really need to find a mentor, you know, someone who, you know, is a true steward of whatever they're wielding, if that makes sense. This is my backyard. Like, this was my backyard 5 years ago. So this is the start. And this is a lot of backyards for a lot of people. It's 1/8 of an acre, about 1/16 of an acre actually is the house in the front yard. So I'm really kind of working on 1/16 of an acre back here. You'll see pictures of kind of where it's gone now, but obviously my all bee operations don't come from here, but this is the starting point of a lot of people. This is what a lot of people, well, I guess the question here is a lot of people would see this as trouble. I mean, there are also areas that farmers have that look like this, that look like a literal weed patch, you know, like there's just so much going on there. So how do we get from this to this? And is this even good, if that makes sense? So that's kind of what we're going to explore here. Many of our tree rows, maybe not down towards Texas, but in the early 40s, late 30s, after the Dust Bowl, the federal government planted a bunch of tree rows that now look like, oops, here we go, come back up, now look like unmanaged forests, like that picture I showed here. Come on, like this. But many of them are aging out. They were planted 80, 90 years ago, and a lot of the old trees that you would see in the background here are now coming down, and many of them are housing bees. So I get called out to rescue these bees from these trees that are being cleared out, as we're clearing out all of this shrub, all of this stuff that was planted 90 years ago that has not been replanted to food forests like it was back then, but it's being replanted to maybe just, cedar trees for wind protection. So there are feral stocks of bees that we run, but the idea is, how do we find the happy medium on our places? How do I harvest wind, water, and solar energy, from this kind of a background? It's impossible. It would be impossible to harness anything here. If a weed comes up, whatever would come up here would just be of no use for me. So how do we harvest all that stuff? Well, we need to start looking at this. We need to stop doing this. We need to stop enjoying mowing. And we need to start thinking more like this, more like color. Well, I tell people, if you want to be successful with bees, you need color in your life, color other than green. We need to do a lot less of this and more of this. I'm picking on the counties here in these pictures. And I understand there's fire concerns and things like that, but there's much better ways to manage hundreds and hundreds of acres of, unused land. We need to do maybe less of this, that he's spraying his grass so it looks green. This might be buffalo grass in the spring where it hasn't greened up yet, to more of this, to planting more food forests. Because I basically have had the top in my backyard. But what would drive somebody to want to plant? Before the pandemic, it was pretty tough to get people to try to plant something for themselves, to start seeds, to buy things that are already started and plant them, and invest in, the time it takes to water a plant, to nurture it, to protect it, and then to protect its fruits, and then to use the fruits to keep the seed and start the whole thing again. But during the pandemic, we saw shortages. We saw that more people began gardens. Unfortunately, they found out that their backyard soils were very poor. So if they did get plants to bloom, maybe they found they had no pollinators. So shortages. I'd love to see if people can type in like how many people actually had some sort of shortage on something, in the last 4 years, and you guys have all probably experienced. But the main reason why I decided to create a food forest in my backyard is this egg story I'll tell you. April, the pandemic 4 years ago started about, December, January, February, March. February, March, the toilet paper was gone, but then April, things started really getting kind of crazy. I used to just be able to go to Walmart and buy, 60 counts of eggs to last me my whole month. I was organized in that way, so I didn't have to go, every week to get eggs. Well, in April of that year, when that pandemic first started, I went and got my 60 eggs, and when I went to the front counter to pay for them, an associate there said, "How many people are in your family?" And me not thinking anything, I just said, "Well, it's just me." And she said, "Oh, well, we're not allowed to sell you a 60 count of eggs. We'll be happy to sell you a 12 count or a 6 count because you're only one person in your family." And at that moment, my heart sank. I did not know what to do. I didn't know what to say, because I was used to a routine. As humans, we try to make our lives as efficient as possible. And And I thought she was joking at first. And I said, yeah, that's funny. A couple back and forths came, and all of a sudden there was security. And then I was like, okay, Jorge, you need to calm down. Like, everything here is just getting started. You don't need to be banned from Walmart. We're trying to get 60 eggs, you know? So I had to try to figure out how am I going to feed myself? How am I going to get 60 eggs so that I can continue my life as normal? They walked me back to return the 60 eggs. They watched me to only get 12 eggs. They helped me check out, and they helped me out of the store. So I was like, well, I'll just come back tonight, and then I'll come back tomorrow morning, and then I'll come back tomorrow night, and then I'll come back the next morning, and then I'll have my 60 count so I can continue my life as normal. But by the time I got to my truck, I was like, well, why don't I just raise my own eggs? At that time in April, most of the farm stores were selling chicks. So I went over to the farm store, and I went, and that time was really dicey with employees. Some employees were scared they didn't go to work, so it was really short staffed. I waited patiently for someone to help me with the chicks, since we're not supposed to be grabbing them ourselves. But eventually nobody helped me, and I stuffed 24 baby chickens into a box, and I was like, I am going to grow my own eggs. I mean, I understood it was going to take a while, and I thought, well, half of them are going to be males, so I would get 12, maybe of the 12 I would get 10 a day, and I could share 7 or 8 of them with somebody else. That was my thought process. I went to the counter, and the lady said, well, you can't take 24 chicks. We can only sell you 6 at a time. So within a 45-minute period, I was told by 2 corporations that you cannot buy our food and you cannot create your own food. And that just floored me. I've spent some time overseas in third world countries where there are shortages all of the time. So I've seen some of the systems that I've set up here personally, where people specialize in something and trade as neighbors. And we used to do that here before, but so that is really kind of what started me on my journey. More people began gardens at that time when they started seeing shortages, mainly because they spent more time at home. A lot of people were, telecommuting, or were told don't come in if you're sick. So, people renovated their homes, but eventually they're like, well, let's plant something. They began working for themselves, their communities, by maybe coming. I saw a lot of communities start gardens for the communities at that time, but they were doing it in poor backyard soils like when I first started. And if they did get plants to bloom, they found that they had no pollinators. So you can see here in this picture, somebody's pollinating tomato plants with a paintbrush. If you had to do that, put that in the comments. There were people that were looking up. It's like, these things aren't blooming, and like there was tutorials on YouTube videos, like take a paintbrush from one flower to another. So the way pollination works is some plants are androgynous or hermaphrodite, where they pollinate themselves. Some plants are wind pollinated, that like the cedar trees, if the wind blows just right, there's just a bad pollen day, and the males release all the pollen, and the wind carries it to the females who catch it. And then there are things that are insect, rodent, bird pollinated. So in many cases, a lot of these people in these backyards ended up becoming the pollinators themselves, because they didn't have the insects to be able to do it. And without insects, you can't have bird pollination, bird populations, if that makes sense, to support them. So this was a very new thing for the US. In the rest of the world, this happens already. Here's some pictures of pear and apple plantations in China, where regularly they would go collect pollen. They would cut all these blooms on orchards in south of China. They would harvest all of the pollen, keep it refrigerated, drive it up north within 1 or 2 days to where everything is blooming up north. And then they give the pollen to these people that are hand pollinating all these trees. So there are areas that we just have nuked with insecticide, with fungicide, with that we've basically sterilized, that we've just killed off every insect, good, bad, or the other, that we are now, the ones that have to do this job. I hope that makes sense. We could talk a little bit more about that and the solutions, the technological solutions that, that are helping us combat this. So what's the solution to, to all of this? How do we turn, a sterile backyard into a thriving, backyard? The first thing is we just have to decide that we want to do this. We want to decide that we want to stop mowing and instead start watering things and start growing things. It probably takes a little more time to grow something than to just mow something once a week, but that's really the first step. In the agricultural perspective, I guess that was the transformation of like when people said, I'm not tilling anymore, when we stopped tillage. In an urban environment, we really have to just stop mowing. We have to, or pick the areas that we don't want to mow to turn into a food forest for ourselves, if that makes sense. I kind of asked this, is this a food forest or a weed patch? You might have areas on your farms or your, or the 2 or 5 acres that you bought that look like this. They look really, really woolly. When I see something like this around spring, I get really excited because to me, look at everything that's there. Willows in the background. So that's a tree that produces pollen for bees. We've got dogwood that blooms in the summer. That's pollen and a little bit of nectar. Sumac, pronghorn sumac is there. And that produces a really nice tasting honey. Poison ivy, also, I have produced just a little bit of poison ivy honey. That one you probably don't want to train and don't want around. Blackberry bushes, we have wild blackberry bushes. Up here we have sandhill plums. I'm not sure if you have them down in Texas. And then there's even wild grapes. I'm here in Kansas, and at one time in the 50s, Kansas was the largest exporter of table grapes in the nation. So we still find some of these wild grapes. So when I first started talking is we need to look at what we have, what is the inventory of stuff that we have that's thriving, and do we want it? And can we propagate it since it's already being successful? Number 2, we really need to get you a beehive. You need to, and we need to learn how to manage it without inputs. Bees are, in my opinion, one of the great barometers of how well your soil health is. Earthworms is one, which is everyone uses. There's all sorts of soil tests, and at every time we go to do field visits and stuff like that, they're always, they have a shovel and they dig out and we look for earthworms. Well, bees are also a way to do that, a barometer. If a beehive can't support itself on your land, then we have lack of blooms, which is good, which means lack of insects. Lack of insects means lack of predators like birds, and things, and if that kind of makes sense. So worms and bees are keystone species, kind of like ants, kind of like cockroaches, kind of like mice. Everything eats them, but they are a great protein source for everything. So, a lot of people don't want to raise mice. A lot of people don't want to raise, those other things, and a lot of people don't want to raise earthworms. So bees is a way to have a barometer on your property to see how you can improve it. The third thing is you have to involve your successors. You can be of any age, but most of the people that hire me to put bees on their land are your farmers that are 10, 20 years from retiring, and their children and grandchildren want nothing to do with the farm, want nothing to do with a little homestead. And the only way that they can get them to come to the farm is by hiring me to put beehives up. Because guess what? In school, they teach about bees to all these kids. So these kids have a foundation and a background and an interest in bees. But bees lead to plants, plants lead to soil. I mean, everything's integrated with bees, and that's kind of what we do. So, I work with a lot of homesteads that basically I become their biology tutor, if you would, on insects and plants, and then that leads into soil. So we have to involve our successors. I tell people that I don't really farm bees. My whole goal with this company is to properly educate, the next generation of children. Just, I think I have 115 children that are actively involved, in all my different homesteads. And I will not be able to change the bee industry. And they might not all want to be beekeepers, but one day they were going to, when they're older, even if they don't do bees, they'll be presented, in front of a hive, in front of a system. They'll be asked, didn't you keep bees when you were little? And they're going to be able to look at that system and say, that's wrong, or try this, or we should do that, or where are your blooms? So that's really, I wanted to try to change, the world myself, but I've realized that I can't. So if I could, if I can just train, show, hundreds of young kids how a natural system is supposed to work, then we have a shot. We produce what I consider world-class honey, and we're the only company in the United States that I know of that uses strictly feral bees that I call native, since they've been here 400 years enough, even though the European honeybee is not native to the Americas. And that's kind of what we do. I manage bees for farmers. I help them produce honey, but also we do pollination on their crops, and we can talk a little bit more about that. I have some slides at the end here when the questions come up. And that's kind of what we do here. We're creating world-class honey that is food, that is actually alive. In this picture, I don't know if you can, I hope you can tell, but a lot of you guys probably have bought honey that has crystallized on you, probably within a couple of weeks of when you've purchased it. These little bottles are 3-ounce bottles, and a lot of these are 6 or 7 years old. They've not fully crystallized, and what's happening here is much different than the crystallization that's happening in the honey that you guys are consuming. What's going on here is we've got natural yeast and bacteria that are actually forming, fermenting and forming kind of probiotics, antibiotics and things like that. This would be like the separation that happens if you were to take, milk from a cow and help, separate it into curds and cream and things like that. So, our honey is truly, exceptional, but different, because our honey comes directly from the hive without being fed anything. Our honey would be like buying milk from a dairy farmer the day that he pulled it, and not buying milk from the store. So almost guaranteed that every honey that you have ever purchased at a store is like the milk that you would buy at the store as well. That's the presentation. I have a bunch of other slides as questions come up, but that's the basis of what we're going to start with. Do you want me just to go through the other slides that are going to answer some of these questions first, or do we want to go to questions?
Yeah, I think so. I know one of the questions, and one of the myths that you hit when I was in your presentation was about, was it bees becoming extinct? Can you hit on that real quick?
Yeah, so if you guys remember in the video, you saw there was like a little shot of like a bunch of dead bees on the ground, and Samuel Ramsey was talking about, or his words in that video were, bees are dying at, you know, an unprecedented rate, and they showed all those bees that were dying. Those are all bees that are managed, if that makes sense. Our company actually puts out boxes like you would put out an owl box or a bluebird box or a bat box. And then we're patient. The bees move right into them. So these are feral swarms that we use. And I'm the only person that'll tell you that bees are not dying at unprecedented levels. In fact, they're a problem. There are so many honeybees, and every year there's swarms. I mean, many of you probably know of somebody or have seen on Facebook groups or on Instagram, people saying, oh, these bees are swarming, somebody come get them. You know, like, who knows a beekeeper that can come get these bees? So bees are not dying at unprecedented levels. Only managed bees, and I will show you kind of why. Maybe we'll go through the rest of my slides, and I'll now give you my lowly opinion of why I think we're failing with honeybees and why the news reports say that they're dying. So we'll keep going. One of the questions that that we can go over, what are some of the plants that we are overlooking? So I briefly talked about the Great Plains Shelter Belt project that began in 1934. Now they talk about the dirty 30s and the Dust Bowl and things like that. One of the great things the federal government did at that time to reverse that sandstorms and things like that is they actually planted, and actually right here, there's actually parts of Texas down here. This is where all the plantings of these trees went, basically, all the way from North Dakota to there was pockets in Texas that over 18,600 miles of shelter belts were actually planted. This picture over here shows what is probably traditional now, where we have monocultures and then we have cedar trees basically, and there's nothing for us to eat. All of this is going for animals, and all of this doesn't produce food for humans. So this is, I think a lot of what they talked about in the video, the folly of how we have things set up. This is what they did in the 30s. They actually took up some of the land and they planted food forests, kind of like this is managed compared to that picture of like everything together, where we had, flowering, trees that produced, sandhill plums, cherries, things like that. Then we had smaller trees, and you can see the trees in the background are managed. So orchards, and then we have things, you probably have cottonwoods down there. But this is, this was their solution to desertification that we caused here in the United States in the 30s. So this is really what our goal is. If we want to become self-sustainable, if we want to become profitable on our land, we need systems working together. This is a systems approach. This is let's throw a dart at the dartboard and hope we hit the bullseye approach. So if our end goal is a food forest, if our end goal is the variety of blooms throughout the season, but we need to start with numbers. So like year one, maybe we need to plant 5 cherry trees. Most people start year one in their backyard or in their homestead saying like, well, I want 1 apple tree, 1 pear tree, 1 cherry tree, 1 plum tree, 1 peach tree. Almost everything in nature doesn't do onesie twosies. A sunflower will put out, 1,000 seeds and hope that 10 of them make it. A watermelon that has seeds will put out, 200 seeds in hopes that 1 more watermelon will grow the next day. So we want to end up with a food forest, but we need to start out by focusing on one group at a time and then supporting it the next year. So like a good plan would be like, I know I want all of these, but let's start with one and let's do 5 or do 10 or do 20. The next year, we are going to plant a little bit more cherries, but then we add our next one, if that makes sense. The following year, we plant, less of the cherries, but we're still adding cherries. Then we're adding peaches. Then we're adding the new one, if that makes sense. So I found that that's the best way to do it with shrubs as well. Year X. So we need to continue doing this, continue planting what we planted the first year in smaller numbers until we can actually get fruit. Once we get fruit, then we can harvest the seeds and then we can start our own, if that makes sense. So we no longer have to buy it. So this is a process that took me 5 years to figure out, because at first I wanted everything. I wanted apples, pears, cherries, plums, peaches. I wanted them all. So I bought one of each. Well, an apple tree needs another apple tree to pollinate. A pear tree needs another pear tree to pollinate or to better pollinate. So I think focusing, the question was like, what are we missing? What are the things that we're missing? I think the way we're planting or the way we're told to plant is tough, because you pick one apple tree and that one dies, you're done, so everything is in numbers, if that makes sense, and one at a time. Same with bushes, and then go all out on covers, so changing them every year. So I don't want to go against, maybe there's some people from seed companies on this webinar, but just about anybody will sell you a 14 or 15 or 44 different seed mix for pollinators. Well, let's say there's 50 different seeds, and let's say there's 1,000 seeds in there. Well, you're only going to get 20 seeds of each. Those are not good odds. So, we really need to go pick one. So like, say we want to go with covers, and then we'll kind of talk about that. So year one, like maybe we pick borage, we pick 1,000 seeds of borage and put them all down. Once that's established, the next year we'll do yellow sweet clover. The next year we'll do black-eyed Susan. So I think this is the challenge that people have. And I think in getting livestock too, I think this is what has happened is that people are like, well, I want a dairy goat and I want a milk cow, and then I want a pig, and then I want this. But you lose that and you lose that whole venture. So I think if you were to just focus on one thing and really learn it, the next year you can move on to the next, but also support the first one that's already working. My father always said, you got to always you always got to feed the winning horse, and so many times we spend so much time feeding the losing horse, the thing that gets sick, the thing that is not doing well. We focus more things on it. We go buy fertilizer for it. We go buy this, we go buy that for it, instead of feeding the one that's winning. The bee industry, why I think it's failing and why I think you guys see, news articles and videos and news reports that they're failing. This is according to me. Pollination is set up kind of like in the video was said. We have large farmers who have monopolies of, say, like almond orchards or Washington apples or cranberries, on the East Coast, Florida citrus, of Texas cows. We have some good cattle here in Kansas too, but there's all these, plants that require pollination of bees. So we've basically created the perfect environment for there to be commercial beekeepers. You saw in the video some images, and I'll show them again, but basically these are routes in the US that these semis, there's about 5,000 semis that move about 2.5 million hives about 5 times a year throughout the whole US. You guys have probably, there's a lot that are in Texas, so you guys have probably at some point been behind one of these semis and your windshield has just been covered in bees. But there is a job. We have created basically the commercial beekeeper. Now, the commercial beekeeper has a really tough job. They're asked to pollinate all of these things. Here we've got corn at the top. Here we've got soybeans at the bottom. Here we got alfalfa and soybeans. These are, or sorry, cotton. So the way pollination works is, insect pollination anyways, is the bees would basically be releasing the pollen from the tassel on the corn, and it would fall onto the hairs of the ear on the bottom of the corn. For the soybeans, they're disrupting inside the blooms, just like in everything else. Their tongues are disrupting, and their bodies are disrupting the pollen for it to fall from the male part to the female part of the bloom. And that's how pollination works, whether the plant does it itself, whether the wind does it, or whether an insect, a bird, mouse, etc. does it. We talked about this. When there are no insects, humans have to do this. Technology, is now has a really good foothold on this. So they have to buy pollen from somewhere, but they have figured out how to have basically drones spread that pollen, if that makes sense. But you tell me what would be more efficient, that drone that you see there going up and down their aisles, or my millions and millions of bees? Look at this field. I mean, it's just covered in bees. There is no technology that is going to be able to, compete with well-managed hives. And this is why the commercial beekeeper exists, because farmers will pay a beekeeper to bring their bees to do proper pollination on plants. The unfortunate part is most of these commercial beekeepers do not have land of their own. They can't feed them between places, if that makes sense. So they might go to corn pollen, but corn doesn't produce any nectar. So they're only kind of half fed. So in order to supplement nectar, beekeepers have found that they can feed sugar syrup. As you can see here, this is like the saddest picture I've ever seen in my life. You have beekeepers feeding high fructose corn syrup to bees instead of nectar. And they call it bee feed. Like, this is not bee feed. This is an input that costs money. If you look in the background, there is not a bloom to be found. We're feeding directly into the hives, the sugar syrup, and basically we've established a CAFO for bees in every beehive. We're finishing bees off this way, and we know this system is not regenerative. We know this system is really, really intensive in inputs, and there's a high risk potential of complete failure. And maybe some of you have gotten out of cattle because of that. But this is no different than why, some cattle operations fail, because they, we haven't figured out, and we haven't developed, a taste as a nation for grass finished beef, if that makes sense. But this is basically what you guys are buying. One of the questions you should ask if you are buying honey from a beekeeper, or if you're a beekeeper yourself, I imagine there's some beekeepers on this forum. You should ask yourself, well, why am I feeding sugar syrup? Most people that get into beekeeping, I ask them, why do you want to get into beekeeping? They say, well, I want to reduce the amount of sugar my family consumes. And look at all the sugar that we're feeding the bees. They're not magical. They're not going to change sucrose into something else. So it's tough. It's a tough sell for what I do, to try to get people to not do this, because this is the norm. The food color challenge that I've told to hundreds of beekeepers, if you're a beekeeper yourself on this forum, you're probably feeding some sugar right now. When I learned how to beekeep 23 years ago from a beekeeper before sugar was so cheap and available and plentiful. If he did have to feed something, we didn't have high fructose corn syrup available to us in tankers like we do now. He would put food coloring in the sugar syrup so that it's hard to see here, but all of this is green. And when it comes out, that tells you that the sugar syrup was put away as honey. So there is no beekeeper that has taken me up on a challenge. When we used to feed sugar, when we had to, we would put food coloring in it so we would know not to harvest that frame, because we know that that had at least some sucrose in it. And we know in the business of selling sucrose to people, that's what Pepsi and Coca-Cola do. So this is really challenging, you know, to ask commercial beekeepers to truck their bees all over the United States to places that are monocultures that have nothing to support them. These commercial beekeepers have to do this. It's not like they want to. This is the only way they can actually, at least artificially, feed their bees so they can be strong enough to make a living. The other side of it too is that they actually use, I call them cow patties, but this is called a pollen patty. It's pollen substitute. Many of the recipes do not have any pollen at all. Now bees collect pollen, but you can see in the picture here, there's not a bloom to be seen for miles. So they have to feed them something. So this something is brewer's yeast, soy lecithin, high fructose corn syrup, some sort of essential oil, no pollen at all. So all of this is the food that these bees are getting. And that's ending up in your honey. And then there's treatments. So we've had problems with a varroa mite. The varroa mite is just like a tick, basically. The varroa mite itself is not a problem. It's the diseases and viruses that it spreads like a tick would. So there's ticks on bees. And the industry solution is we're going to fumigate inside the hive to kill off some of these ticks, these bee ticks. So they are either dribbling acids. That one says poison right there because they're using oxalic acid. That's one of the main ingredients in wood bleach. Here they're using wood bleach itself. They're not even using something that's regulated. So they're using wood bleach to put into these vaporizers and basically bug bomb the inside of a hive. Now they don't do it when there's honey supers on top. They only do it when there's no honey, most of them. The problem is, if you guys have ever bug bombed your basement, you know that all that stuff travels. It crystallizes as you clean, as you move, as it breaks down, you know, it ends up in residue everywhere. So right now we're ignoring it as an industry. We have made a stance that we will never use any inputs or treatments that's, you know, and that's why our honey is so sought after. We do not use any synthetic, you know, sugar derivatives, no pollen substitute, which could include soy, egg yolk, brewer's yeast, things that people are allergic to. And people are developing allergies to honey because some of these things are not caught in filters. It ends up in the honey, and we will never do this. More nectar goes to waste than is gathered. 50 to 80% of it is simply lost because there are no bees to gather it. Because of the 2.7 million beehives that are commercially kept, none of them are in your backyard. They're all in monocultures. So, and they're being, you know, put through the ringer, being fed unnatural diets. And that's why they suffer. Every year, we have to bring in millions and millions of worker bees from New Zealand, Australia, because their seasons, their summer seasons when they have the most worker bees coincides with our winter season where we have the least. So we actually bring billions of worker bees we fly them to be able to augment and replace all of the bees that we improperly fed and could not overwinter. Questions? I think that answers a lot of the things. I think one of the other questions was, you know, how do we harness wind, water, sunlight? So go back to these pictures. You know, in the traditional farming system that we have now, where we just have maybe buffer strips and monoculture, wheat, soy, corn. I mean, it's what we do, but the amount of sunlight that corn, that wheat, that milo can harness is seasonal. You know, once it's dead, there's nothing there. Now, cover crops have helped in being able to harness, photosynthesize sunlight into sugars that we're hoping are going to be transferred back into the soil for the next generation. The cedar trees, which are the staple for wind protection, that's kind of like harnessing wind. What I call it is more like, you know, keeping it at bay so that it doesn't destroy things, if that makes sense. So we're harnessing how to control it, how to funnel it, if that makes sense. And then water, you know, if we don't use cover cropping, if we don't have continuous living roots and shrubs, we're going to have more erosion. As the water comes through, it's going to, you know, there's nothing to stop it to use it. So by planting living roots, we're harnessing solar in the form of photosynthesis, turn into sugars. We're harnessing water, be able to keep water on a land instead of having it run off on a fallow field without a living root. And we're able to funnel and control wind erosion by growing food forests. I hope that kind of makes sense. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of information. I know we're only an hour in, but I imagine we're going to have a lot of questions here.
Yeah, I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna let Arlene and Uche hit you with the few, and then we'll open it up to the audience. But I think you hit it out the park. So we're gonna go through our list here and see what's left. But thank you so much for hitting on that.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Jorge?
Hi, how are you? I'm doing great.
Good. So I want to ask you about urban farming. And you actually already answered the question about really, is it beneficial for an urban farmer to include, to include bees in their urban space? But after your presentation, it's kind of like a no-brainer. You wanna put that as a part of your holistic management?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to recap. You know, half of my customers, clients, what I call my extended family, are homesteads, and not a homestead like a 20-acre farm. I'm talking like, you know, everything from, you know, a half of an acre in a city, kind of outside of the city a little bit, to a 5-acre HOA plot that allows 2 beehives or 3 beehives or 4 beehives. Now, on those places, what we do is we actually set up boxes to see if we can lure in local bees, bees that are there. So we've lured in 20 so far this season on these urban farms. So if we know that there are bees around, then we know that we can harness them. Now, their production will tell us how much blooms we have on our land, if that makes sense. And their survivability without any inputs will tell us how healthy our soil is in being able to plant the things that we want. Without bees, it's really tough to, you know, have good crops of anything, you know, of fruits, you know, of vegetables. I mean, tomato is a fruit, I guess, but if that makes sense. But really the important part is, without bees, honeybees, we cannot have seeds. And seeds is what we're really wanting. I mean, the tomato fruit is great, but harnessing all those seeds, learning how to pull all those seeds of that tomato plant now that has that information from your soil, to have the most local tomato that has made it, the mother plant made it on your soils, where whatever they're at, whether they're deficient in this or too much in this, that seed now is a viable local something that belongs on your farm. So the needing of production of seed can only come if you have a beehive. Essential.
So my next question is, Dallas County, and I shared with you, Dallas County requires that the urban farmer, if they have less than 10 acres, that they have at least 6 hives. So what does that look like in a because if I'm definitely for the bees, for holistic management, but when it comes to thinking of maybe the profit and the processing of the honeycomb, is it beneficial for the urban farmer to invest in that, to be able to harvest the honey and to continue to make profit?
I think that is the wrong. I think that is the wrong approach to bees. If you're wanting to generate tax benefits from your land, buy a mixed-use commercial / residential place, put up fencing and rent out half of your acreage as a yard. It doesn't make sense to do bees, to me, for tax purposes. I think you have to commit to wanting to feed yourself, if that makes sense. 6 beehives is a lot, lot to maintain.
6. Oh, 6 hives.
Yeah, 6. Even if it's not impossible, but you're going to have to use inputs. So you're back to adding sugar syrup, adding pollen substitute, fumigating, and that's really what people do. That's the only way to keep 6 beehives alive on a 2-acre plot, on a 5-acre plot, on a 10-acre plot. I don't think it pans out money-wise. If you're going to feed, if you're going to medicate, if you're going to use plastic foundations, which we don't use, that honey only commands 18 to 28 cents an ounce. Our honey starts at $2 an ounce. So if you were to take the approach of having one of our hives managed naturally, being able to educate your clientele on why our honey is worth $2 an ounce, one beehive can pay half the taxes you're trying to avoid to pay. And those taxes can then help your county do whatever silly things they might do with it, if that makes sense.
Right.
So, I think my father shaped a lot of my kind of business knowledge when I was little, and I did not really understand. But he would say to me, if we're having to pay taxes, that means we're making money, if that makes sense. So
yes,
the effort it takes for tax avoidance, I think, puts a person in a defensive, in a state of deficiency, if that makes sense. If I'm trying to avoid something, I think mentally that's not a positive thing. Now, if we go into, and this is kind of how I choose my clients, is if we go into it as seen as like, let's produce, the best honey that we can. Let's produce the best produce that we can. Let's work on an orchard so our kids are be selling Texas peaches instead of these Colorado peaches that are in monocultures. If we go into it thinking, with our whole hearts going, we're going to do the very best to make the best product that's going to command the best price. We're going into this in a spirit of abundance, if that makes sense. And I think that's what makes the difference. If we're always worried that the tax collector's coming, if we're worried that this, if we're worried that that, we can't make proper decisions. So it's important to start small. You know, you're going to get to 6 hives if you do it the right way. So you'll get to that point, but is it worth working? You know, like if I wanted to do that, I'd have to spend at least 3 hours with my tax accountant for him to figure out, you know, what forms they have to file, you know, and they're not going to be really, you know, proficient at that. And then that might trigger an audit on everything else because they filed it wrong. Like it doesn't even make sense to be farm exempt on my farm animals because I run them along with what I eat. So I'd have to pay my tax accountant 10 hours worth of work to figure out all the receipts of what I eat from what I actually sell. By then, I mean, I could just sell 1,000 more quail to pay the taxes and it would help the county. You know, I think if we approach things in the spirit of abundance, that really changes everything.
You brought up some points that I thought was excellent to help answer the question from one of the guests. Brian, he's asking, I thought the topic was creating pollinator-friendly farms. Did that change? And so hopefully, Brian, I'm hoping that in Jorge's answer, which was a real life answer, I was really asking for myself and other urban farmers, but I'm hoping that you are taking notes that the bees, the pollination, and the whole holistic ecosystem that is evolving creates a very healthy farm. So I'm hoping that in his answer to me, if you're in an urban setting, taxes is what drives a lot of people to heavy farming on their land. They want the agriculture tax exemption. But if you're a farmer that is learning about holistic management and holistic practices that we are promoting and educating on, that is what this panel is about. This panel is about you understanding that the bees and your produce and your soil and your water and your land are collectively thriving on each other so that you can be healthier. And Jorge, I'm so glad you answered it that way because my organization our mission is to educate city officials so they can understand more. I want them to understand more of why I would like you to change some of these policies. And this is why. And so I would like to take my background and share with them. If you are a person of color, your farm, and if you're in an urban setting, your farm has suffered from toxicity and exposure in the urban space. So we kill the bees, we swat the bees, we spray the bees, but you are also affecting your crop, your grass, your soil, and your water. And we have the highest rate of disease and chemical exposure than any other ethnicity. So if you haven't taken anything else out of this call, we want you to respect the bees, thrive the bees, love the bees, because they will love you back. Love your plants and produce back. Love your soil and your earth back. And then therefore you benefit. And that's it. That's all I got. That's all.
I think, you know, in your talks with city councils and maybe HOA, you know, communities, representatives, things like that. One of the things that I would suggest is, you know, maybe try to come up with policies that incentivize people to grow shrubs and trees, not necessarily have bees. I mean, we're putting the cart before the horse, saying like, have 6 bees, but if there's no food for them, you're going to fail. You know, just a ballpark figure. If you were going to buy 6 complete beehives with bees, I mean, you're looking in the neighborhood. You know, a hive is about $300 for just the box, another $200 for bees. So you're looking at $3,000 initial investment for bees, not including the feeding, the fumigating, and stuff like that. If they all die out, you just have to buy bees again. But every year you'd be spending $1,500 buying bees if they all died out. So does that offset the tax incentive? Like if that's the numbers answer of kind of what you were asking. So yeah, I don't know.
That's good, and I want to point out too, just for the listeners too, because terminology and words are important. So when you hear things like holistic, that's a different way of saying regenerative agriculture and climate smart. So all those things. But great stuff, and thank you for Arlena. Thanks for that question. Or hey, thanks for your response, because it's all relative. It makes sense, and things need to be the way we see things. So often, farmers, we hear somebody talk about something out in the field or in the barber shop, and we jump right on it without really thinking through the business sense of why, the what behind the why and the why behind the what. So thank you so much for that. And if you don't mind, if you could again summarize the importance of bees and what we're talking about here, because I guess the question was, you know, hey, the topic is pollinator friendly. So maybe talk about the why behind that of creating a pollinator friendly environment. Hit on it again. I know you hit it over and over again. You covered a lot. So sometimes we miss it because we're grabbing all these different things, but if you can hit that real quick for us, I greatly appreciate it.
Yes. So why are bees important? Why do we need to focus on providing a pollinator-friendly space for bees to exist? So let's say we don't want to get into beekeeping. Let's say I showed you kind of the dirty secrets of the bee industry of having to buy this, having to buy that, having to feed them this, having to feed them that, having to go into them every 2 weeks. Say we're not ready for that. We're not ready for bees. Can we benefit? Can we benefit our land by providing things that will feed the bees that are already out there? And that's maybe kind of what we need to talk about is, you know, let's figure out what your goals are with your farm. If you want to start producing apples, let's start producing apples. But along with the apples, we'll produce, you know, like those only bloom in the early fall to help produce an environment where bees will be successful, a pollinator friendly area for you to be successful growing apples for yourself. We need to see how to feed them the rest of the year. So we need to find something that's flowering in May, something in June, something in July. And, you know, the question was asked, like, what plants can we plant? The best way to figure out what plants is this year, make it a goal that every time you see something that's blooming in somebody's front yard, in somebody's backyard, you know, in an area that just catches your eye that there's blooms, take a picture of it. You could send it to me. I can help you identify it if you want, but make a diary this year of what is blooming at different times. And that gives you a really good idea of what you could plant. Think of it as like also, so what are the benefits of providing something that's pollinator friendly? Well, let's make it personal. Like, let's say you see these flowering trees and you really like them. Or let's say you really like fall foliage and you want to introduce that into your place. Well, can we find a plant, a shrub, a tree that's going to have beautiful fall foliage that you love, that is personal to you? Then you're going to take care of that, if that makes sense. So we can harness, you know, the pollination aspects of bees on a personal level, even if we don't have bees. Does it make sense financially? We have to look at the other things that we get from it. Do we, you know, if we plant trees in certain areas that will shade our backyards, you know, for where we have picnics and family gatherings, you know, let's pick something that will produce a bloom, you know, to help the bees, but also give us the shade. You know, do we need to, instead of spending, you know, fencing, you know, having money on dead wood to put up or metal or anything like that, can we create a shrub row with a tree row behind it that in 1 or 2 years can do the same thing as a fence? And it could feed us. Maybe not blackberry bushes, because those, you know, go really crazy, but maybe something we can manage, you know, maybe something that will provide, you know, us shelter to our backyard, to the area where our kids play, you know, to the area where our pets are, if that makes sense. So can we replace something that's not living with something that's living? Does that kind of help? We have to make it personal. Like it really does have to make sense. It's a valid question. Like, why would I want to do that? We have to find the reason why. If you don't need shade, if you don't need wind protection, if you don't want to, if you have 5 acres that you have to mow every week, like how about take 1 acre of that and turn it into shrubs so that you don't have to mow it. So it's a little less time to mow it, So I think we have to be selfish in that way for it to make sense for us. But, sometimes you start down one path and you're like, I don't like this. So then you got to find something else. I hope that kind of helps.
No, that was perfect. Uche, do we have anything in the chat that I know we like to get to? We apologize. We love to get to our audience and get some more participation in that piece. Do you see anything there?
We do have a question from Raquel. She says, what type of hive boxes does Jorge use? So Jorge, what type of hive box do you use? And I could go into technology as well. Like what new technology, old technology can people be implementing?
Yeah, our hives are not available for sale at this moment. I've experimented with 27 different styles. We've had hives that are, 8 feet wide, 4 feet, 4 by 8 feet, where we've just had, the last 7 years have been R&D for us. We have 2 different hive types that we have ourselves, and I think at one point we will be selling them to people. They will utilize the same internal parts as what is currently being used, but our boxes are heavily insulated. They are condensating in water so that they produce water actually for the bees. Basically, we've recreated a tree hollow inside of a hive. You can see pictures of it in my videos on my TikTok and on my Facebook, which is at Napa Bees, NAPABEES. So you'll see lots of pictures. Anything that you see that's like red or a blue hive, those are the different kind of pictures. And then I do show a lot of pictures in there about like the internal guts of it. I don't share how it works with people other than the people that buy from me, but it would use the same component. So if you're using Landstroth boxes now, the Lego style stackable boxes, all the guts would work in our style of boxes.
Sounds like a lot of technology. I'm not familiar with it, but
it is old technology, but
I mean, you can say old, but to someone who is not familiar like me, like that's new, because you're talking about creating an ecosystem for the bees whereby they don't have to venture too far to find necessary things for survival. It's all in the box. They do have to go out to nearby flowers or shrubs to collect nectar, but all in all, everything is within that box and that system created.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. One of the pictures in the slide showed our hives going through fire. So like as fires went through, the boxes didn't burn up. So I mean, there's lots of kind of bells and whistles to our boxes, because we can't take a risk as a company to lose a whole apiary to fires, that we have here in Kansas. So yeah.
So I guess my follow-up question would be, a farmer or grower who's just starting, what would you recommend they just get? What would you recommend? Okay, at least have these functioning systems in place to have a viable beehive.
I think the best way to start is doing an inventory for the year of what blooms you have, whether it's a picture, kind of a diary, and then just putting up empty boxes to see if bees will move in. Like, it doesn't matter what system you start with. Like just putting up a bluebird box to attract bluebirds to see if there's bluebirds, just like putting up an owl box. So it doesn't matter which system you start with, if that makes sense. But it's better to see if you can lure bees that are local to your area to get started. Now, once you get started, we can talk about putting them into a Cadillac box, I guess you could call it.
we have no questions, and I know we're short on time, very short on time. I guess you've already provided. What can you tell us a memorable experience or success story that you have that you can share with everyone? You say you say you've been doing this for like what, so many years, decades. You've experimented with 27 different boxes. You've probably had your bee scares. You've been stung maybe 2,000 times. Now you're
Just this
immune to the
week.
bee sting. Yeah, you're immune to them. So can you share like some memorable experience or success story
Two
with us?
really quick ones. One really quick and then one a little bit longer. I often have people want to come up and see how our bees work, you know, and I throw them in bee suits and stuff like that. You know, especially if it's someone who's a prospect, you know, I have them come out. I want to make sure that they're comfortable with the amount of bees and stuff like that. I got to get you guys to come up here and we go through some beehives. But I had somebody who's an acupuncturist, and she came out in dolphin shorts and a tank top, and she's like, I do this for a living. I don't mind getting stung. And she's like, I ain't wearing that. I'm like, I have a full suit. Like, I need you to suit up. And she said, no way. Like, this is what I do. And man, I tell you, our bees in our hive are actually much better because of their living conditions. But she would get stung, and I was watching her, and she'd get stung on the forearm, and she'd be like, oh, liver. She gets stung like, you know, on the back of her neck, and she's just like, oh, C3 lumbar, whatever. Like, she was like, and I was just like, man, am I crazy? Like, you know, how awesome was that? Like, she came out for a therapy session for herself because in theory,
and a chiropractic adjustment.
Yeah, I mean, bees only sting you where you need it, according to the legends. So, you know,
wow.
you show up in shorts and a tank top, the bees will let you know how to fix yourself. But yeah, that was a crazy, awesome story. You know, I hope that kind of helps. It just, you know, I shared that last slide. You kind of saw there was like a glove full of stingers. Like, it just, you know, if you're gonna mess with the bull, you might get the horns. You know, if you're gonna wield bees, you're gonna get stung. But you know, we can. It's just part of it, if that makes sense, and you'll learn to like it.
That was beautiful, man. We're at the end of our time, but I was going to ask you to share the how the bees, you know, how you can tell the weather. I remember you were talking about that actually, and what's going to grow, what the crop, all that stuff the bees tell. But we'll wait for next time. That'll give us an excuse to have you back on again, because such a great information, man. And thank you so much for taking the time out to share with our group. For all our attendees, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us and get this great insight from Jorge here. And just thank you so much. We're going to end it here because we're at our time. But again, we will be doing this next month, so please be checking your calendars, your newsletters, and thank you to all my panelists and hosts that are on here asking all these wonderful questions, and we'll see you next time. So till next time, be the exception.
Yes, be the exception.
Bye. Everybody have a great week. Bye.